I want to talk about some research that I read recently, and it's really scary. And I want to make sure that the people for who this is applicable, that they are aware of this and that they can use it according to what they think is best. It's about weight-losing drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro, and the effect that they can have on people who are actually not that much overweight or who are actually quite lean, and when they're using it, the potential effect that it can have on them. Now, don't get me wrong, these type of drugs, they are an absolutely incredible invention. And they have been real game changers for people that are severely overweight. Like, it has been saving many of these people's lives. But the problem is that more and more people are using it, also people that are really not that much overweight. And so with this high number of people, are there any side effects that we should be concerned about? Now, to understand how these drugs work, I always like to look at the biology behind them. And so what these drugs are, they are GLP-1 agonists, meaning that they mimic the activity of GLP-1. And GLP-1 is a hormone that we produce. We always produce it, and it comes from our small intestine. And our small intestine will actually increase the production of GLP-1 after we've eaten. So the more that we eat, or depending on the type of meal that we eat, the more GLP-1 that we will produce. And GLP-1 makes sure that we feel full after a meal so that we don't keep on eating. And so these GLP-1 agonists, they will act in the same manner. They will bind on the GLP-1 receptor, basically telling our body that we're full. Now, what's so interesting about GLP-1 is that its activity also depends on what we eat. So they did this experiment where they gave people a meal that was very rich in fats, and they could see a very strong GLP-1 response, so people would feel very full. They also did the experiment the other way around, where they gave those people a meal that is very rich in carbohydrates and sugars, and then they could actually see that the GLP-1 response was not as strong and that these people would not feel as full. So this is pretty good insight if you want to be more mindful about what you're eating, because if you replace your carbohydrates with something that's more rich in protein and fat, you will actually feel full much faster. So more GLP-1 means that we feel fuller. But it gets even more interesting because they did this other study where they had a group of lean people and a group of obese people, and they were again measuring GLP-1 response. And first they gave those people a meal that was very rich in fat. I think it was actually exclusively fat. And then they saw that the response on that meal, both in the lean group and in the obese group, that the GLP-1 response was equally strong, meaning that they felt equally full. They did this experiment again, but now with a meal that was very high in carbohydrates. And again, the lean group, after that meal, they showed a very strong GLP-1 response. However, the obese group, when they had that meal, even though it was a lot of sugar, a lot of carbohydrates, they hardly showed any GLP-1 response. Now, this is actually mind-blowing because it means that, for example, someone who's heavily overweight and they are craving sugars, they have a sugar addiction, they want that dopamine hit. After they've eaten a meal that is rich in sugar, they won't even feel full. So their body is basically telling them, yes, we can eat more. So it's really a very bad situation to be in. And this is why these drugs like Ozempic are so good, because they mimic that GLP-1 signal. So for people who are obese and might be struggling with a sugar addiction, with these drugs, they will have that full feeling, and they can actually work specifically on the sugar addiction. So far so good, right? These drugs help people that have a real psychological challenge and help them overcome that problem. And indeed, they have been saving so many people's lives already. But what happens when people that are lean or just slightly overweight start taking these drugs? And this is where the story takes a little bit of a darker turn. And the reason why I want to share these results is because most of the news that we see about these drugs is of social media influencers that show that they lost 50 pounds, they lost 25 kilos with these drugs. And indeed, that will happen. But what happens if lean people start taking these drugs? What could be the potential side effects? So here's where the story starts. There's this study from a little while ago called the Step 5 trial, where they looked at people who were taking these drugs and what were the immediate effects on them. And they saw that indeed there was weight loss. And they also saw that from that weight loss, 60% of that weight loss is fat, which is really good. But it also means that the other 40% is lean mass. And what is lean mass? It is muscle, but it can also be things like, for example, bone density. And this result can actually be pretty dramatic because one of the main predictors of a long, healthy life is the amount of muscle that you have. So you definitely don't want to lose that. Now, for people that are heavily overweight, those potential side effects, that loss of muscle, it doesn't weigh up to the benefits that they have, of the life-improving effects that they have of losing all that weight. Now, let's imagine the following scenario where we have an older lady, let's say in her 50s or 60s, and she's been using Ozempic for a year and she lost 20 kilos. Really great. Now, 60% of those 20 kilos will be fat, but the remaining 40% will again be muscle and maybe things like bone density. We also know that for people, this is a study from the UK, that after 2 years, people that have been using drugs like Ozempic, 70% of them will stop using it. That means that for this lady, so she's stopped using it, it is unfortunately relatively easy to get that fat back, but it is really hard, especially the older you get, it's really hard to get back that muscle and things like bone density. If you lose bone density, that is something that you will never get back. And those things are crucial to have a healthy older life. And this isn't just a hypothetical scenario, because I saw this video the other day that went viral from this Californian singer called Avery. And she had been using Ozempic for a year. She was off it. And the video starts when she just got out of the doctor to have a health checkup to see how good she was doing. But instead of hearing that, you could see that she was in significant distress because she had actually heard that she had a lot of bone loss and that she's a very young lady, but she was suffering of osteoporosis and osteopenia. She herself said that it was because she was using Ozempic for weight loss and she just lost too much weight. Now, you could see that Avery was already before the treatment quite lean. And so this is a huge red flag. And we know that more and more people that are lean and people that are struggling with eating disorders, that they start using drugs like Ozempic. And Ozempic will make you stop eating or eating much less, and you will end up in a situation where you have malnutrition and where you start losing more and more lean mass. So what people have also reported is that when they use Ozempic, they don't just lose their craving for food, but they also lose their energy to go out and to do exercise and to hang out with friends. So then for some people, you end up with this perfect storm because you end up in a situation where you're really not eating enough and you're also not exercising enough. So there's no reason for your body to keep those muscles, to keep that bone density. And you might have that secondary effect of having really weak bones. Look, I don't want to say that these drugs are evil because they have saved many people's lives. They are really wonderful. But if you are in a situation that you're actually not that much overweight or quite lean, you might want to rethink using these drugs. Is this really the best solution for you? And if you decide using them, think of them as training wheels to help you get to a better eating pattern. Also, keep in mind with that weight that you're losing, 40% of that will be lean mass. 40% of that will be stuff like muscle. So prioritize exercise and prioritize in your diet that you have protein and fat, the stuff that your muscle is made of, so that you minimize the loss of muscle and that after you've been using these drugs that you are in really excellent shape. So what are your guys' thoughts on this? Is this something that you've heard before? Is it something that you're worried about? I'm really curious of how your experiences are with these type of drugs. They are revolutionary, but at the same time, we shouldn't be using them blindly. And also, I find it really interesting to see these type of stories and then make sure that enough people hear them if it's relevant. So if you have any type of questions about health or about diet, about certain type of foods that are supposed to be wonder foods, and you're not sure of how they would work or if it's actually true, let me know. I love to figure this stuff out, and if it's something that I can work with, I'm happy to make a video about this like this one here. All right, I'll see you guys later.